Hey, this is Adam with Space Dodo, and I've got a new asset pack here. So this is going to be kind of like an introduction to Metasounds, and it's also going to be an introduction to my asset pack I've just released on the Marketplace store, which is designed to help you get started with Metasounds. It has a lot of sound effects. It has a lot of examples how to utilize it in code, and a lot of examples about how to do a lot of your own synthesizer stuff and more. This is only the beginning of what I want to do with the plugin, but it's a great first step, I think, and it's weeks and weeks of work. So uh, here we go. First off, you can see I've got an example widget. We'll look at that map, an example map, which is what you can use the example widget in if you just want a quick demo of how Metasounds can work with things. And we'll show you that in just a second. Some Metasound music I've created, and this is just some things you need to put it together, and some sound effects. So we'll start with the sound effects here. The way Metasounds works is you can synthesize your own sound effects or use samples. Now, a sample is just simply using a sound effect that you were typically used to using. For example, this pop sound. It's just a wave. It's just a sound wave, the same kind of sound effect you would typically use. If you want to use those in your Metasounds, you certainly can. So if we open up this Metasound here, you can see this is actually a blueprint that you can load in. See, I have an input sound. That input sound can be a sound wave, and this is how you can interface with it in blueprints. And this is essentially, I created all the inputs for the left side of this wave player here. The wave player just plays a wave. You get a mono, stereo, quad, surround sound. We're going to just do a mono right now, and you can select a wave asset. This has got standard Unreal Engine assets here, but we also can do the pop sound. So now if I play this meta sound and I have it going to the output, this right here is the actual sound it's going to make. If you have the start of the sound, which I have as an input trigger, this is standard. Every single one will come with this right here, an input signal, an output trigger, and a output audio, like the audio that's going to come out of it. So this is like the simplest possible meta sound you can create. This on finished here is a trigger. It's a cue, right? So this will do something when it starts playing. This will do something when it finishes playing. Think of this like your arrows in blueprints. On finished, I'm going to say that the meta sound is finished. This will let it clean up its sound. With Metasounds, it's actually running sound on a separate thread, which is fantastic because it lets you do a lot of live sound processing without slowing your game down directly. Now, obviously, anything that's putting a load on your computer can slow your game down in some way, but if you're not on the main game thread, if you're on an alternate thread, then it's something that you can do with a relatively low cost towards your game's frame rate and things like that. So this one, if I play the sound, it just plays that pop sound effect there. Now, if you want to interface with your meta sound, it's going to get a lot more complicated as we go. If you want to interface with your meta sound, you can create special inputs, right? So over here, there's different inputs you have or outputs you have. These are what's going to start with the meta sound, what you're going to feed into the meta sound versus what you're going to get out of the meta sound. Everything has two outputs, like when it's done and what the sound is going to, that the sound you're actually going to play. But usually you just have one input, and that one input is just it started. You can also have other inputs. For example, you can create a float input or a really any of these right here. I can't go through them all. String input, a time input, a trigger input, and a trigger input, you can name it anything like second trigger. I'm just naming it that so I don't get confused. When I pull it out here, see now I have another trigger input, that I can access in Blueprints. So what does that look like? Well, let's go to the test map here. And here I have an actor, and this actor does a couple of things. So in a sequence here, first it starts by spawning a meta sound. So this is where I spawn the sound, but instead of spawning a wave, for example, this one's just a wave sound. I actually don't have the wave sound in here. This one is just a wave sound right there. And this is how you would typically do it. You would just spawn a sound, or, there's alternate ways to do it as well, but this is one example of spawning a sound. Spawn a sound, and it just wants a wave input, and you just put that wave cue in there. That's the standard way to do it. But with Metasounds, you would actually select one of the Metasounds. For example, we could do alarm or whatever. And when you start the Metasound, you can set the wave parameter inside of it. Now this Metasound, I changed it. It doesn't have a wave parameter, so it would get mad at me if I did that. What does have a wave one is the example I showed you here. I want to be able to input a wave into this, or a pitch, or a loop. Should it loop or not? And so I can go to the custom sample wave. And then here, now I actually have the input, but I need the input name. So the input name here is called input sound wave. You can copy and paste it right there. This is your input sound wave. And now you can say, for the input sound wave, I want to use this wave right here. And that's how you set a parameter. So you set wave parameter, you can set a bool parameter. And so for the bool parameter, this is just an example again of how you can interface it with Blueprints. We want it to loop. If we say we wanted it to loop, we could put true, and then I could go back to my sample, and then I have input loop is the name of this one. So when I select it over here, I can see the name. I can copy and paste the name into the input name. And then now it can actually trigger that this bool is on, right? So this is how you interface with the sound in real time. So let's cover some of the other sound effects and things we have, because that's just a little intro to Metasounds and the very basic. I have created some synthesized sounds. For example, this is an alarm, and it uses some LFOs and a sine wave to do some interesting things. So let's get started. I've got in my sound pack, I've got alarm, coin. See, some of them finish on their own, and some of them need to be stopped. They're perpetual. Concern, chime, electric grid, electricity, an engine. Now, some of them, like the engine, you can actually change the input here. So if I open up, I opened up electricity. I meant to open up the engine. With the engine, this one's a little bit more complicated. This is not one I would recommend starting to learn how to use it with. But it's got an input that you can access on runtime, like we talked about. You can change on tick or whatever you want to do. You can change this input here of the frequency the engine will be inputting. So that's an example of how you can utilize a runtime sound effect. Footstep, Frantic Chaos. I like that one. High voltage. Like radio interference. I think this one is based off a sound that you might find familiar. Let's take a quick look at this one. It looks more complicated than it is. What it is it actually has a tempo. And then that tempo can start a trigger. And that trigger has a count of how many times it's been triggered. And with that, we can do basic music. For this one, on each trigger, I compare a bool and an array. So I have a beat, rest, beat, rest, beat, rest, rest, rest for that one. This one in my array, I named the array, right? You can see it over here. Not true, true, not true. Beat, rest, 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 beat, rest. So I do that to trigger only as it counts through the array, it will trigger on the true ones. Or I could have it trigger on the false ones, but I have it triggering on the true ones. And again, this is just a overview of Metasounds. This is all here to be experimented with, torn apart, looked at, added onto, whatever. Every Metasound kind of works like this when it comes to your own synthesizing. You have a audio oscillation in from your sound card. So these oscillations can be a sine wave, a square wave, a triangle wave, or a saw wave, or maybe some kind of raw noise like pink noise or white noise, and also LFOs. And LFO is a really, really low oscillation, like a really like almost inaudible low sound. It's a big topic. I cannot possibly cover the entire topic today. But essentially, a frequency is the note it's playing, and I have the note here manually set. You can set this frequency however you want in all this stuff, but this one's just typed in, it's manually set. This one's designed to just be face value, easy to understand. And you have an audio envelope. Now, an envelope essentially lets it start the oscillation and stop the oscillation, and it kind of has a way it opens and closes the sound. So it really kind of shapes the sound. And I have an envelope that kind of starts immediately and then it decays very quickly. And the attack curve and the decay curve are essentially about how it envelopes the audio. And then the envelope here is essentially like the opening for the audio, right? And if I have the envelope triggered, then it will then take this square oscillation, and this square oscillation is always running, like it's always putting out audio. So if this is 0, if this not actually being triggered, it's 0, and 0 times anything for the audio signal will be 0. So essentially you'll get no sound. But when the trigger opens up the audio envelope, that's essentially a note. It's like pressing the button on the keyboard or hitting the drum. You're starting the sound wave. You're starting the envelope. So that will like open up the sound wave. Well, the sound wave is always running, but like the signal, because 0, anything times something not 0 will have an output, right? So this will actually let the square wave through for a certain amount of time until it closes it back up. So that's essentially the basics of any kind of synthesizing in Metasounds. Is you have an audio from an oscillation, and then you have an envelope type. This is one type of envelope, but a very common one you'll use. And you multiply them together to get an output sound. And that sound will start on a trigger, and it won't last forever because this envelope will close up based off the parameters you gave it. And then you can do something when it's done, or you can do something else off the same trigger. It works a lot like blueprints. So let's give it a listen again. There we go. The actual Pokemon sound is a bit different. How it is synthesized a bit differently, and it has like a little like record. I can't even. I don't know. It's something like that, like a creaky door sound that happens behind it. So it's not. This is not the exact sound effect, but it is meant to mimic it very closely. So here, Secret Unturned. This one's very interesting. With this one, it plays something different every time. So what we can do with Secret Unturned is when you play it, it will play a random note. So MIDI is essentially like a way that computers can like standardize like notation and things like that. It's its own thing. Metasounds can use MIDI. And with essentially, I say I want it to use a major pentatonic scale. I don't have time to explain music to you, but essentially a pentatonic scale is something, it is like 5 notes inside of a scale that will always sound good when played together. They won't won't be a combo of a pentatonic that will be dissonant. A lot of guitar solos will run off pentatonic scales and stuff like that. So this one, all I'm really doing is I'm on the count, I'm stepping up on the trigger counter. This one will move at 50, and then it'll go to 55, 60, 65, 70, and it'll do it 7 times. It's a trigger counter, so it'll just count up every time it's triggered, and it triggers on a repeat, and that repeat is on a beats per minute thing. And you can get all this stuff, like beats per minute. You can get all this stuff just by typing it in, just like you do in the rest of Unreal. So then I make it, I add a random float to it to essentially randomize. I want it to always go up, but I don't care exactly how much it goes up or not. So with that math, I can take a note in and find the closest MIDI note to the range. So essentially I clean up the math a little bit, and it will find a note that is the closest that will be a major pentatonic. And then when it goes out, I turn that MIDI into a frequency, and that frequency I feed into a square. Now this could be, I'm using a square again, but this could be a sine wave, a triangle wave, a saw wave. But I could feed into that, and you can get those just by typing in, saw wave, right? Let me just, for demo purposes, I'll show you what it would sound like if I just went into a saw wave here. I'm going to sync to it too, so that way it doesn't trip up. So you can see you get all sorts of different abilities, and you can change the sound and timbre of it also by the audio envelope too, as we discussed previously. But that is a good example of like how you can continue to add on, mess with these sounds. One thing you could also do is maybe like put a mixer in here, and then we do output to the mixer. And then we output this audio here. And so now these should be matching audios, but the problem is we also need to multiply it by the audio envelope here. So let's multiply. So these will be should be exactly matching notes, but just 2 different waves. So you have 2 different timbres together. That was very, very loud. You can mix it right here by just changing how much of the sound between 0 and 1. Now you get a much fuller sound that way. So let's go back to the audio samples. Siren. That's actually the similar to the Pac-Man noise. It's not the Pac-Man noise because it's just made similarly to the Pac-Man noise. I'm not exactly sure how the Pac-Man noise was made, but I figured out how to make something that sounds like it in Metasounds. So this is an example of how to do that. An LFO, this is the use of an LFO. Essentially, this oscillation is a low oscillation. It kind of goes like really low, like think ocean waves, like growling. And that will give some sort of mild fluctuations to things, and you can change how much that fluctuates in the kind of LFO, whether it's a sine wave or a saw wave. And so that is a great way to give some natural variation to make things sound a little less computery, because you can essentially wiggle the waves around to be a little less true, a little less perfect. That's not exactly how I'm using it here. I was using it in a very extreme example there. With the sine wave, Siren 2. Different versions. And a good background noise, spaceship hum. All right. So that's the sound effects that are currently in the asset pack. I do hope to continue to expand on this pack over time. It just takes a lot of time, and this is where I'm starting. So we got some instruments like a drum kit. Got the flute, ocarina, or how to make something sound more 8-bit. I've got an 8-bit filter on this drum kit. And one of the things I'm most excited about is the music. This is all procedurally generated music. Some of it is continuous, and it's something that you could change. Like you could add inputs to it and add things that happen with the music, or do things, get cues from the music for your level. But some of them are continuous, like this fairy forest, and industry is continuous. But the fairy forest actually is procedural. So and the Discovery Z, they will always be a little different every time. They'll have some sort of a different iteration that happens, and they'll kind of continue on riffing a little different as it never quite repeats. One of the things I want to show off here as well is the test widget. So in the test map, let's go ahead and open it up. Oh, we put that widget, we put that sound to looping, didn't we? And earlier. So let's go back here and go back to let's go to this asset again. Make it not loop. Okay. Now it only pops once. Okay. So, that's how to like utilize a meta sound with something in the world. Now, it doesn't have to be a widget slider. It can be like something physical in the world or something, but you just got some input that knows where it is from the start to the finish. So those are different examples of using Metasounds in a widget here. But also behind it, I have any kind of, when you click the mouse and move it around, it feeds that into a sine wave. So you get something that modulates the sine wave, like a keyboard that has a modulation on the side. It's very similar to that. All right, and so let's take a look at this widget for the final piece of it here. In the example widget, that's what we're using in that level. This is an example of how you can interface with the Metasounds. For example, that slider, what it does is it takes the value of the slider and it inputs it as the float and the float parameter. So in that sound, particularly the lever sound, which is just a meta sound variable I've created. I similar to the other, as we were looking at the beginning, I'm just setting that parameter, but I'm setting it every time. See, this is on value change. So every time the value changes, I'm giving a new input to the float parameter, which is essentially the frequency it will be. And I want it to start playing the sound. So what I do is I check to see if the sound exists. If it does exist, and it if it does exist and it isn't playing, um, then I go ahead and I spawn the sound. Um, wait. So because I want to make sure the sound doesn't stay around forever, so I want to spawn and despawn it appropriately. With the mouse capture end here, this is where I execute the trigger parameter input finish, which is in the lever sounds particularly. That's an input I created to trigger that finish that we talked about, um, uh, which is a custom thing just so it knows when it's done and it can kill the sound. The is playing is essentially a way to know that does it exist and is it playing. If that's true, but the mouse let go, then go ahead and kill the sound. That way it won't continue playing forever when you let go. Or spawn 100 versions of the sound, because something you could do is essentially spawn a sound every single time the value changes. That would be bad, right? Like I only want to spawn the sound when I start the slider, and I only want to unspawn the sound when I end the slider. So here I've got on button pressed, that's the siren going on. That just spawns the sound, and I just save it as a variable. And then when it releases, I just check the variable and I trigger that input finished, which triggers the finish output, which stops the sound and kills it on in memory. So also there's the drum kit. This one I just toggle it on and toggle it off with a flip flop, and with this one I just play the sound. It's just a simple play the sound, because the sound itself will, when it's done, kill it. Because we looked at the secret earlier. It's this one right here, and you can see that it's just got an output. And when the sound's done playing, it's just done. When the trigger resets here, it triggers that output finished. The other ones are using this input created, so when that input is triggered, then it finishes the sound. But since this one's just waiting on it to do one revolution of the trigger, so when the trigger resets, then it kills the sound. Whoops. So that's the beginnings of my Metasounds Starter Pack. I hope to continue to have more and more iterations of this, more features, more sounds to start with. And if you think it would be interesting too, also adding more custom samples to it, so more actual wave sounds to be used in the Metasounds. I also am interested in creating essentially a synthesizer, a MIDI synthesizer that can do play different samples for your synthesizer, or actually create different synth noises for the synthesizer. These are all things that will take a significant amount of time. So as you're interested in these features, come to my Discord server and tell me what you're using and what you want more of. And so as I create iterations of this plugin, I will continue to add to it in a way that you find helpful. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this video, if you don't buy the plugin, I still hope this video helps you understand Metasounds. And if you do buy the plugin, definitely drop by the Discord server. Let me know, so that way I can be there to support you and help you as you learn how to use Metasounds and use my plugin, hopefully, in your game. So thanks for watching. This is Adam with Space Dodo. We talk about all sorts of stuff, just from game design to actually game production, especially with the Unreal Engine, but a little more than that too. Thanks for watching. See you next time.